México es un país de contrastes. Algunas de las personas más ricas del mundo son mexicanos, y el municipio más rico de Latinoamérica está en Nuevo León. Sin embargo, más de la mitad de los mexicanos vive en pobreza, con difícil acceso a servicios de salud o educación. El 1% de la población posee casi la mitad de la riqueza nacional.
Here they are, poorest people on the left, richest people on the right. Now let's show how the world's total wealth, roughly $223 trillion, is distributed. The vast majority have practically nothing. Nothing with which to educate their children, nothing with which to pay for basic medicines. While the richest 1%, they've accumulated 43% of our world's wealth. The bottom 80%, meanwhile, that's 8 out of every 10 people, have just 6% between them. But even this doesn't really show how extreme things have become. The richest 300 people on Earth have the same wealth as the poorest 3 billion. So the number of people it takes to fill a mid-sized commercial aircraft have more wealth than the populations of India, China, the US, and Brazil combined.
About 1 in 5 people on this planet still has to live on less than $1 a day. Compare those people to Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim, one of the world's richest men. If he were to spend $1 million every day, it would take 211 years for his money to actually run out. I do hope the poor guy has a pension plan. So, rising inequality is a fact. But is it a problem? Doesn't all that wealth eventually just trickle down from rich to poor? Well, not quite. Best-selling economist Thomas Piketty says the consequences of rising inequality are potentially terrifying. Nobel Prize-winning economists Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman aren't fans either. I know what you're thinking. Piketty, Stiglitz, Krugman, they're just lefties, fear-mongering and fueling class war. But wait, what's this? Bill Gates, the world's richest man. The head of the OECD, even right-wing US Republicans, and of course those communists over at the International Monetary Fund.
Excessive inequality is actually bad for sustainable growth.
Got that? Growing inequality isn't just morally grotesque, it's bad economics. It's bad for your bottom line.
Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century says we should all worry about What does he mean by capital? Well, that's anything that can be owned and that generates an income. That can be housing, lands, stocks or shares. Now that idea isn't new. In fact, the link between capital and incomes is very familiar, not least to readers of Jane Austen and Honoré de Balzac. Piketty says that for 19th century novelists and their readers, the two ideas were used interchangeably. The book's big innovation has been to build a massive data set that allows them to look at patterns in the ownership of stuff, going back centuries. His research found that in the 18th and 19th centuries, the value of capital grew faster than the economy at large. So, by 1900, the amount of wealth had grown to around 7 times national output in Britain. And since that wealth started off being owned by rich people, that means that the rich pulled away from the rest of us. Now you can see that in the way that the proportion of national wealth owned by the top 1% rose, and the top 10%. But in the 20th century, things were a little different. First of all, because of war. Between 1910 and 1950, the world wars and decolonisation clobbered the European rich. All that stuff they'd accumulated got, well, blown up or handed back to other people. Then, after the war, the recovery was historically unusual, partly because it was all catch-up growth. The capital stock grew more slowly than the economy at large and was more heavily taxed. So owning all that stuff didn't really help the top 1% power ahead. The rest actually caught up a little bit. Since 1980, however, Piketty thinks that things have reverted to the older pattern. Capital has been growing faster than the economy at large, and since the rich start off owning more stuff, that drives up inequality. So far, so uncontroversial. But Piketty's thesis is that this trend might well continue. And if the rate at which capital grows remains faster than the growth of the economy at large, then the rich will keep pulling away. And the world could look, once again, like a Victorian age. The rich will be rich because of who their parents are, not who they are. And that's a major public policy challenge. Piketty's diagnosis might upset people, but his prescription will make him even more enemies. His proposed solution is a global wealth tax, a policy that he suggests is pretty unlikely to happen. Still, Piketty's data collection and analysis is likely to win him a Nobel Prize, even if his policy suggestions aren't taken up.